Hey everybody, Allison here with the Integrate Yourself podcast, and I'm here with Maja Gottlieb. We are going to do a special segment for you guys today. We talked about this. We had some feedback from our Facebook page about anti-aging and anti-stress protective hormones, and we wanted to talk a little bit more about that because I feel that in most nutrition talk, this is not talked about. So I wanted to give you guys, we both wanted to give you guys just an overall kind of perspective, very simple explanation of what these hormones are, how they really help the body, how they really protect the body from the aging process or aging too soon, because that's what we're all about. And so the hormones we're talking about, I'll start out with pregnenolone, progesterone, and DHEA. There are natural protective hormones. We're going to give you guys an idea of how those actually work in the body to combat the stress and the aging and slow it down, and how you can use those to your advantage. But first I wanted to start a little bit by kind of telling you guys how those get produced in your body, and it's very natural. It comes from the energy that you take in through food, but you can also get these things from supplementation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today too. So I just wanted to start by talking a little bit about cholesterol and how that is a factor in this whole process, especially with basically starting with pregnenolone and how that is, how cholesterol is a precursor, or it is needed to produce pregnenolone, since basically cholesterol gets converted into pregnenolone, and how important pregnenolone is for progesterone and DHEA. And then how also thyroid hormone is needed and vitamin A are needed to convert the cholesterol into progesterone. So that's kind of the process. That's a little bit of an overview of how it works. And those are all your protective hormones, but it can get kind of complex because like Maja, a lot of people will take supplements and then expect everything to work. Because I've heard people take some of the hormones that we're going to talk about that are actually down the road from these protective hormones, which are estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone, cortisol. Sometimes people will take testosterone or estrogen to try to counteract the aging effects, but that actually can actually age you faster. So I wanted to talk about that as well. Let's see. Yeah. So we can, yeah.
So I guess we could start with what you first said about how food is, or fuel. We'll say fuel because it's not always food as much as what you're ingesting in terms of energy. So let's say your fuel, so because you could do liquid or you could do regular food. And what we need to pay attention to is how. So we have talked about the different ways of oxidative versus fatty acid, and we've talked about a couple other things in terms of what happens. But if we go back into the cell where you just mentioned the cholesterol is converted into pregnenolone, that's in the mitochondria, and the mitochondria have to have energy to be able to do this protein synthesis, the steroid synthesis, and each of those things produce another cascading event. And if you have low fuel, then that part of the cascade can't be made. And pregnenolone is then converted into progesterone, which is then, there's two routes. You can do the progesterone or you can go into DHEA. And each of those will create a different precursor. So there's different enzymes that will help pregnenolone go to progesterone, which I remember, but only because I wrote this down recently, is 3-beta hydroxide steroid dehydrogenase, which is a really mouthful.
Yeah.
And then the other one is 17-alpha hydroxylase, which is what helps pregnenolone turn into DHEA. And these are all your steroids synthesis that is influenced by how your thyroid's working and how much vitamin A is in your system. Progesterone then goes into your corticoids or your androgens, which is progesterone or DHEA. So that's a short way of saying it, but there's, the corticoids turned into your aldosterone and your cortisol, and then your DHEA turns into your androgens, your testosterone, and your estrogen. So if any of those get inhibited, you are either increasing your cholesterol because it's not being converted, because the pathway has been stopped. So if you're constantly in high stress, you won't be able to produce enough energy for that cycle to keep going to create the steroids that you need.
Right, so it kind of impedes or inhibits the synthesis of cholesterol to pregnenolone, which is a problem, right? And that's why I think a lot of people is that the case, do you think, why people get high cholesterol, because the conversion is not happening?
Yeah.
The thyroid's low, it's not functioning very well, that kind of thing.
Well, it feeds back on the loop, right? So like creating the low function because you can't produce will also inhibit any other cycle to come back. So if you took the cycle where T4 needs to go to T3, so you have increased cortisol because you're stressed, right? Mm-hmm. So it inhibits that inability for the liver to create the T3, which is important for the liver function, the thyroid function, and your protein synthesis is not able to happen. So you create more of the fatty acid chain happening. So you keep creating that reducing of the muscle mass because it's eating away the muscle, and then creates more of the same. So in that loop also you create increased estrogen, and estrogen is another one that keeps the cortisol cycle going. So you're always creating this loop that is not allowing you to create the protective hormones, which we're talking about, pregnenolone. And those are also called youth steroid hormones, but they're the ones that keep everything in balance. So as you talked about the supplementation of just testosterone or estrogen or something like that, you're not really getting to the problem. You're actually just like having a headache and using an aspirin or something to coat it until it kind of fades away by your body regulating itself, but you're just kind of covering the symptoms.
Right, and because your body is, also the way I see it is these hormones help your body to go into that auto-regulation kind of adaptation phase. So your body knows what to do. It's just a matter of like how much stress you have on your body, through aging, even like a depressed mood, low thyroid function, exposure to toxins, environmental toxins, stuff we put on our skin that would increase estrogen in the body, especially for women. And then of course for women after the age of 40, the ratio of estrogen to progesterone starts to change, and that's why you see a lot of women who gain weight, their moods change, their memory, and changes. And then I also heard something that was really interesting about that women, it's like I don't know if this is still the case, but there's like a 10-to-1 ratio for women to get Alzheimer's more than men. That is incredible.
Well, if you think about the brain and how the pregnenolone is like 100% more in the brain than it is in the tissue, so it's really prevalent because from what I understand, the brain white matter is made of like 95% cholesterol, which if you think about what we just said about how cholesterol can turn into pregnenolone, the accessing of the pregnenolone is so vital for, just the brain cells themselves because they actually feed better with glucose. And if you keep reducing low carb, you keep putting yourself in a fatty oxidative thing, you're causing an increase of insulin resistance to occur. And there's studies about this, and that's kind of why people don't understand that when you say you're not allowing yourself to have sugar, you're actually inhibiting brain function, and that's where the fogginess comes in. This becomes the issue with dementia, because they say Alzheimer's is kind of the dementia version of the brain, dementia of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get into what happens to women, after I just talked about like the cycle of increased cortisol causes increased more estrogen, which causes more increased cortisol, that loop keeps running. And as the tissues keep cycling through that estrogen, because it's usually never in as much as in our blood as we take the blood test, but they really don't take a biopsy of the tissue to find out what's happening to the estrogen once it's in the cells.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a quick second, because I think like that's very true. Like when you get when you go to your doctor to get tested for high levels of estrogen, they'll usually test the blood. They won't test the tissue, but what you're saying is, and what I've learned is that the estrogen is actually in the cell. So you have to test the tissue in order to know like how much estrogen is in there. So I don't know if that's a standard
that's
test
probably no, it's something you can't really get done, right? It's something where if you're going to take tests, you have to kind of take different tests. So prolactin is a good register for how much estrogen's in your body. Prolactin is I think it's the androgen. I can't always remember the backup of how that works, but it basically comes with increased serotonin and increased prolactin. So if you check your vitamin D, you check your prolactin, you check your thyroid panel, and you check other I lost it. There's one other thing that if you check your vitamin D, cholesterol, your thyroid, and vitamin D, you get that profile better, and you can see what's happening with the prolactin involved. So there's a little bit of more understanding of why you've got more things in a repeat cycle than you think. And you can simply see it in women who have a lot more body fat, the bluish tint to their skin, because estrogen creates that edema.
It makes the cells hold water, right? Varicose veins. And then men, I think, get more of like a belly. They get more fat in the belly as they get more estrogen. So,
which women do too. It's just that with our wider hips and stuff, you can kind of get into more of. I think you mentioned butt area, glutes.
Yeah.
So we get that more hourglass figure, but it's not so. It's like the heavy glass in the bottom.
Yeah. Well, and then you see, a lot of women look, they just start to get more, they just gain weight. They just, and a lot of women are that I've talked to especially, are very, they're just, what's the word I'm looking for? I can edit this out. Let's just pause for a second. So, that's what's great about this. So a lot of women, they get very frustrated about, gaining the weight and doing, the things that they were doing before weren't working, and that's mainly because of the hormonal change. But for some reason, this stuff isn't really being addressed. It's not being addressed in the nutrition community. It's not being addressed in the medical community. And I'm really perplexed as to that. So that's one big reason I wanted to share this with everybody today, and Maja too, of course. We both wanted to share what the anti-aging and or the protective hormones can do for the body. So pregnenolone is really kind of amazing because it can, and it's great for both men and women have these hormones. And of course, it's a precursor for progesterone and DHEA. And then from those hormones, you get the testosterone, you get estrogen, and aldosterone. and the cortisol. But those are used, those hormones are used for when you need them. It shouldn't be turning on all the time, when cells need to die or when you need a lot of energy and so those should happen in a natural cycle. But going back to pregnenolone, it's going to, some of the really beneficial effects that could happen if you have a high level or you have a normal level of pregnenolone would be an improved memory, calming effect on emotional wellness, prevents edema, because the cells will not hold the water anymore. The water will be outside the cell, and then it normalizes the stress hormones, which are your cortisol, your estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone, improves function of thyroid and your metabolism, promotes brain regeneration. So the cells have the energy to regenerate, basically, is what that means. And then improves joint mobility, prevents arthritis. What we don't also realize about arthritis is that arthritis is, we all know it's about inflammation, but it's also about low energy. So really what it comes down to is, from what I read, it's pretty simple in some ways. The low energy creates inflammation because the body's trying to keep up, and it just doesn't have enough reserves to actually regenerate, so the cells just keep dying. And so of course it also helps to prevent tumor growth brought upon by an estrogen dominant tissue. So those are some really great things. Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things is first we have a bit of a dogma that came out where estrogen was better, and that's where estrogen therapy was considered. So we have that part, but now research is kind of showing up that they're really giving credit to pregnenolone, and some have saying it's the grandmother of steroids because it's the seed of all of the steroid function. So it's the first step, and then from there you've got to understand where it's produced. So it's produced in the adrenal glands, it's in your food whenever you eat something, and it can be produced from that skin to your testicles, your ovaries, and your brain. So like I said, with the brain, if you think about the amount that's there, that in its need for there, because of its of what it does, because the cholesterol is actually helpful, whereas people tend to believe cholesterol isn't helpful. But cholesterol is actually the ground forces that say, okay, we know these walls are weak, we're going to help support it, and we're going to keep your arteries from collapsing, we're going to keep the flow going. But as the stress starts to build even more, then you get more collective cholesterol, which is where the dogma kind of throws people out into believing that cholesterol is bad. But it is actually the support system until you start to regulate your blood sugar better, your food frequencies, and you allow the stress to come down, because you're stacking stress as you keep adding, and the nervous system has only so much that it can attain to. Right. So it's going to start shutting things down, and reproduction is one of the things that will stop when you're in the fight or flight, because it doesn't have time to reproduce and then help you heal. And one of the things that the pregnenolone helps with is the calcium. So I think it's acetylcholine release that happens, and the calcium, where a lot of people get really interested in is when their calcium is low, but they think, oh, I got osteoporosis, but it's the same situation. It's locked in a different place. It's not being released, and that's where people would get into magnesium issues, where they're basically low magnesium, or they start getting cramping when they're in bed. They get cramping when they exercise. The system is actually just overtaxed, and that calcium can't be released. And so if you
you're saying that there's not enough reserves to have that process in the cell, you're saying, because it stays in the cell instead of going into bone, or
then the system starts pulling from the bone because it says, okay, I need that calcium. Right. And so you have a lot more contractile issues happening in the muscles, and loss of bone because of the breakdown. It's just like what I said with the cortisol increasing estrogen. Cortisol then increases the stress hormones that keep you pulling from your muscles. It breaks down your protein, it breaks down into sugar because it's looking for the sugar and you don't give it. And so then it's going to say, oh my God, I got to get it somewhere.
Right.
So it's the cycle too. Most people want you to, as us being personal trainers and helping people, they want to lose fat and gain muscle. But we're kind of fighting ourselves by not allowing these people to understand, or influencing them by saying, let's keep, giving you hard workouts when your body is just simply not functioning, where we misread some parts of function is, oh, I must have a bad leg. I must have a bad this because I broke this or I tore this and that's the problem. Where it's really just the nervous system isn't flowing back there as much as it should because it's diverting away from that part to save other parts. But what I wanted to talk
it's
real
not
quickly,
high on the priority list, basically. So like whatever,
right,
because if you don't have the energy to do it, you're not gonna be fertile. You're not gonna create another organism inside, and you're not going to be able to regenerate your own body, right? Or recover from a hard workout or even an injury. So those are definitely good points.
So then you constantly have injury over injury because, like I said, the regeneration, we keep diverting the energy to save the body. It's not able to heal at night. You're having either restless sleep or no sleep, or you're having hot flashes, or in terms of night sweats because the cortisol levels are increased as you go into sleep. But the main thing I wanted to bring up was the brain function. So like I talked about the increase in the stress, but so the brain, if it doesn't get enough, so like the hippocampus and the medulla. So the hippocampus is about the memories, right? So all about your memory. We talk about brain fog a lot. So, and also we talk about the amygdala is about emotions. So if you think about women who get lost in emotions or have brain fog, you kind of can correlate why they're having this issue, because estrogen keeps flowing in their system, causing that cell to have it, not able to get out of the cycle and go into the Krebs cycles. And so what happens is you are increasing the stress to that body part, especially the brain. Emotions are heightened and the memory is lost. And so you got to think of also eye concentration, things like this that really are being diverted away because it's not on the high priority list at the moment. Your heart's got to be, things have to keep flowing, Mm-hmm. So that's why people, even in pro athletes, you see their functioning, their brain function and their arm functions and leg functions don't work so well when they're past, the ability to do something.
Right.
And so the DHEA, the pregnenolone, and the progesterone are those protectors for the excess of the stress hormones. So a lot of the things that we kind of aren't seeing right now, but is coming to the surface more, is why like certain drugs are being introduced to GABA, certain things that work with pregnenolone really well to help the brain from stress. So that's why you see supplementation when there are a lot of people.
But those aren't really, those don't really work though to help with pregnenolone production, do they?
They don't. They help in terms of support it. Like one of the things that they said with pregnenolone is with GABA. I'm talking about natural GABA, things that go in your brain.
I thought you were talking about the supplementation. Okay.
Well, but you see the influx of this idea of giving supplementation, like the GABA in substitution. And you're right, there isn't always a good response to it because the body isn't cycling it itself. Mm-hmm. But that's the idea that people believe. Oh, I'll just plug it in. I'm missing some GABA. I'll just plug it in.
Right. They don't understand there's a whole process that needs to happen in the body. It's not just about taking whatever you're missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it can help maybe for a little while, but then what it's saying also to the brain is, oh, I don't need to make that anymore. I get it.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well,
But
where does GABA come from? Do you know? As far as like, how do we produce GABA, and is that a hormone as well, or is it a byproduct of something? I don't know much about that at all, actually.
let's hold on that one. Let's take a
Okay, I
break
can
for a second.
take that. I can take that out too. But yeah,
Yeah, hold on.
I was curious. Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah, we're
what
going in
I
a very different direction, aren't we here?
yeah.
Yeah.
So, we'll talk about GABA, but it's a neurotransmitter. So think about
Okay.
it in that sense that it's we have certain neurotransmitters that we create through protein synthesis, and then just what I wanted to say was that GABA plus pregnenolone protects the brain from burnout. So if you want to add that in or take it all out, we can redo that
Okay.
one.
You can say that
But
one more time, and then we can cut this whole thing out, and yeah,
okay.
what you wanted to say, and then I'll just clip it, and then we can keep
So back to the pregnenolone and the GABA is that with conjunction of your body creating it and synthesizing it through its natural forms, that is a protector of the brain from burnout, which is helping the brain keep its function, allowing you to have memories and your emotions in more control.
Cool. Yeah, that's amazing that that it works like that, and that we blame ourselves so much in our emotional kind of having to control our emotions. When it could be a total biochemistry issue or physiological issue, right?
Or just not managing our stress well because
Yeah, yeah.
we believe we got so much to do, right? Women tend to strap on a lot to get things done, whether it's with kids, with their job, with their spouse, with their whatever we seem to want to. We talk about this before, but like the Wonder Woman aspects can kind of run you to the ground if you kind of don't know how to recover from your stress, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
what we want to provide is a little bit of information of how to regulate yourself. And so okay, my stacking of stress has exceeded my recovery. Like I know I didn't eat enough today, or I didn't eat the what was suited for me because I was not planning for that day as well. Things get out of our hand, but we can find ways to solve the problem right then versus just depriving ourselves, or putting ourselves in this like I can't, or trying to create some kind of band-aid that doesn't, really deal with the issue.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And the need just to keep going, or we're running on adrenaline and cortisol, and we don't really realize it, and it's just maybe an excitatory type of energy, which is excitatory when the cells are in that state. That can later on in life is kind of, from what I've been reading and the research I've been doing, it looks like that's what leads to dementia and a lot of those diseases. So, and a lot of the diseases that also affect the nervous system.
Yeah.
So, those are things to definitely pay attention to, I think.
I kind of think about it when you got into college or high school, when you started to drink, you got that nice high, you're like, oh, I'm feeling good, everything's great. And then after like the fourth drink, you start slurring your words, you start getting into that, things aren't feeling so good, you're starting to get slurring. The night is
getting older.
Yeah. And that
on.
part of the excited being in stress has that same, first you're like, I can, it's like staying up at night and doing all your studying at once, right? You're like, I'm good. I'm definitely, able to retain. Then all of a sudden the brain just starts fizzling out and you're like, I don't know what I just read. And, so it's the same kind of like high, people live off of that stress. So they feel like I'm not hungry. I feel good. Or I've had a caffeine high, right? And I kind of am doing really, I'm bright and excited, but then the body starts to feel the fatigue. If you're paying attention. Now, if you're so stressed and you're so into your whatever, it's the same thing as being high on alcohol, caffeine, or something else.
Yeah.
You start to feel that down slide,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also one thing that people I don't think know much about that I've really been paying a lot of attention to recently is muscle spasms. Muscle spasms are a huge indicator of your body saying, "Hey, we don't have enough energy to actually keep going here, so we're going to slow you down a little bit."
Right. The
And
muscle,
that's yeah,
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 the
and
muscle
that's
contractiles,
yeah,
that's just it's not just because you're doing a heavy workout. It's not because you if in your sleep, most people think it's something about like I didn't have enough water,
right.
which at the time when that came out was people were dehydrated, and they were saying you didn't get enough water from your food, and you needed to induce more water because you were working out more. And
Was this based
in
on
the
like a study or something? Is that how that came about, or is it
I
just?
think, if you see a health industry kind of started taking on the belief that athleticism meant health. So
Oh,
if you're an
right,
athlete, people really kind of work around this aspect of low heart rate, low pulse, and
right.
so it's not synonymous. Actually, you're more conditioned, but you're not really healthier. What you're
Yeah,
doing is slowing down the mechanism so that you can be like a racehorse ready to do your sport. And when you kind of look at the health of a long-term athlete, they show that the health is starting to diminish. That's why they always say, when you're young, you can be a great athlete, but when you get older, it's not so good.
yeah.
And that's why sports leans into the youth, because you're strongest then. But it is really just that what we talk about many times is the quickening of the aging,
Yeah.
because the body doesn't have time to keep the thyroid working. The liver function is being taxed a lot more because you're pulling from the glycogen.
Well, that brings us full circle back to the anti-stress and anti-aging hormones. Like you have those when you're younger. That's what helps you regenerate so fast. But as you get older, it's not that you can't like keep doing things. Like you can still be really active, but I think it's like you have to really pay attention to how you're recovering and how much you're putting into your recovery. Like needs to be a lot more planned out. You need to be aware of what's going on in your body. So those are the things that I think are really different, especially like we said for women, when that ratio really starts changing after the age of 40 of estrogen and progesterone. And I wanted to kind of talk about also progesterone. We've talked a lot about pregnenolone, which is a precursor to progesterone. So let's talk about progesterone, how it can be really great, especially for women, and offsetting the estrogen dominance and helping the body recover much faster. Because progesterone is something that women have when they're pregnant, for sure, a lot of. And for some women, like if they had some issues before they were pregnant, sometimes those go away when they're pregnant because of the high levels of progesterone, because it's what's really good and healthy for the baby and the mother. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and how you can actually produce more progesterone in the body from diet.
I think you kind of just said the key point about it is that it is the precursor. So like once pregnenolone is there, then it's diverted into whether it's progesterone, estrogen, or testosterone. And I think another androgens, but I know that one of the things that the ratio of progesterone to estrogen is a real issue with fertility, right?
Right.
So one of the things that we pay attention to now is when women have been too stressed, they lose their period, or if they have low thyroid function, they're they come in a reading where they say they may not have enough estrogen, or they never come in saying they have too high of estrogen, but it's because the same issue we just talked about with the tissues and where the estrogen's being stored. And so when you think about how much is in your body and then how much you're not making of progesterone because the synthesis isn't happening, you are creating a ratio differentiation that is hard for the body to get out of that cycle. So progesterone is going to help men too. It's not just women, but they would be best in kind of working with pregnenolone versus progesterone, because they get converted into the testosterone, levels have to be balanced a little bit different. But mostly what we're looking at is like any of that inflammation that's being created is keeping the synthesis from going. So progesterone is like the next step down to how healthy you are in terms of are you sexually active? Do you feel vital? Men, especially if they're having impotence problems, women, if they're having major issues with their period, or some issues of, what we get into then is like the whether or not the gray hair is more dominant because you are accelerating your aging, or is it a natural say, which means that part of your I think, is it I forget, keratin that's in your is it creatine in your hair?
Oh gosh, I don't know about that. Danny would know about that more than I would.
Yeah.
But I think so. I mean, your hair is supposed to get gray, but not as soon. You're saying not as soon as most people are getting gray, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's happening too soon. Yeah,
it's too soon, or you're losing your hair, right?
Yeah,
which is
totally. Well, isn't it like a copper deficiency as well?
Yeah. So the progesterone and all that can then be the cascade into what your mineral deficiency can be seen as happening, right? Because the minerals also are part of the makeup of what's happening in your cell. So you got kind of a combination of things happening.
I've got a list of symptoms for progesterone deficiency here, if you want me to just say them real quick. Acne, which, adult acne, aging of the skin, wrinkles, anxiety, allergic, having allergies, a lot of sinus issues, arthritis, any kind of appetite disturbance, like not having an appetite is probably... Hold
on. Go. Hey, Bob, I'm on the phone with Allison. I'll be done in just a little bit. Okay, hold on. I'm going to close my door. Hold on.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, you can redo that one if you want.
Okay. I'll just start with, I can totally just, okay. I was on appetite disturbance, any kind of, not being hungry, not wanting to eat, asthma, bleeding gums, blood pressure issues, high or low, bruising spontaneously, cancers caused by excess estrogen, carpal tunnel syndrome, cold hands and feet, constipation, colitis, depression, edema, endometriosis, emphysema, epilepsy, facial hair, I guess that means for women, fainting, fatigue, fibroids, fluctuations in weight, gallbladder symptoms, glaucoma, goiter, headaches, migraines, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, immunological problems, infertility, inflammation diseases, inner ear dizziness, insomnia, menopause, memory problems and dementia, optic neuritis, osteoporosis, premenstrual syndrome, PMS, and varicose veins and bulging veins. So that's a long list, but those are all the symptoms of progesterone deficiency, which is kind of incredible. Just to think, hey, if we just changed that ratio and brought up our progesterone levels, think about what we could do with that.
Yeah. And that's, it's not much we have to do as much as stop doing certain things to help the body do what it's naturally supposed to do.
Right.
So reducing PUFAs, which are the polyunsaturated fats, because it creates inflammation and increases the cortisol and and creates the problem with the liver, so that the T4 doesn't convert to T3. So you think about like what happens naturally to the body is just being impeded. There is more just getting out of your own way, because you don't, one of the things we keep thinking is we have to do something, and we don't. We really have to just
Right.
let go of things, that
Yeah.
that weren't really working for us, but we really thought they were. And that we go back to what we always talk about, Allison, is the temperature and pulse, how people can regulate, with even not having to do a lot of blood testing, because, in the beginning, you just don't have the energy to think about
No.
doing one more thing.
I have
Um,
actually a thermometer right here, and I'm just going to show everybody real quick what we're talking about. Like it's a, I would recommend getting a quick read one that that you don't have to wait a long time to take, because you'll be taking this like 3 times a day. But what Maya and I recommend is that you take it first thing in the morning before you get out of bed, and you take your pulse at the same time, about 30 minutes after breakfast, and then again about 30 minutes after lunch, and that's going to help you see a pattern. And you don't have to do that every day for maybe 3 days to a week, just to see if there's a pattern. And if, for example, your temperature and your pulse goes low as the day progresses, or into midday, then you know that there is an issue with your energy production. So, and then based upon those readings, what we call our baseline reading, then you can get all kinds of information from that. And there's many different avenues you can go down for that. But that's how we start people. That's how we help people begin the process of really using their own body's response to help them know where to go with the nutrition aspect of it.
right.
Yeah.
It's simple too, right?
Really
Because it's
simple, low tech, doesn't cost any. I mean, it costs what, $7? No, maybe 14 now to buy to buy a thermometer. They have gone up in price a little bit, but yeah, I mean that's about it. And you just really, the hardest thing is probably logging everything. To be honest with you, that's the biggest challenge that I have with my clients and myself too. Is really just writing everything down, remembering to do it. So. But once you get kind of in the swing of things, and it's important enough for you to want to know the information, then you'll do it, and it'll all come together.
Yeah, and then we're here for support, which we really want people to give us some feedback, tell us what's
Yeah.
working for them, what's not working for them, and keep us in touch with what other things you want us to talk about. Because
Yeah, definitely. You guys can. Probably the best way to do that would be on our Facebook page right now. We have an Integrate Yourself podcast community page on Facebook. So if you want to join that group, definitely join it. It's totally free, of course, and you can ask any question you want on there. We'll definitely be there and answer it the best way we can. We may even answer it on a podcast. We want to try to continue to do these educational small segments for you guys at least once a month, in addition to the interviews. So just for everybody, so that everybody can get some good information that you can use and try out with yourself. And we'd also love to hear feedback from you guys. If you have taken the information in and applied it, we'd love to hear about that too. But yeah, so I mean, I think that's about it. But a few announcements if we're going to wrap it up. I would say, of course, we have our Patreon page as well. That's basically becoming our membership page. It's a $5 a month reward tier, and then you can get all the stuff that we put out. Basically, you can be the first to see it, and as well as we put certain stuff just on that Patreon page, just for our patrons to see and to benefit from, as well as questions that are asked on there will get addressed on the podcast, and we'll also give you guys a huge shout out and thank you for supporting our podcast. Other things, you can find Maya at mayagottlieb.com. You can find me at pureenergypdx.com. And the next couple weeks, we're going to have some more movement based. We're going to go more in the movement realm for the next few interviews. So we're going to be interviewing some really, really great people, some exciting guests. We have Katie Bowman actually coming up in December. We have Esther Gatiel. I can't pronounce her name. I think that's about right. And they're both like amazing women. They've come up with some amazing movement systems that they share with people. And if you haven't heard about them yet, definitely check them out. That's going to be super exciting. So we have so many great things to come as well. We'll probably be talking to Danny again sometime in the near future. And yeah, so that about does it, right?
Yeah, thanks for listening, and
yeah,
we'll be seeing or listening to we'll be talking with y'all guys soon, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
thanks,
Maja. Talk to you soon. Bye.
All right, bye.